boys and girls. I'm the reading teacher, and I've got a great biography to read to you today. I want to see if you can figure out who this person is. Clue number 1. He was married to a woman named Martha. Clue number 2. He lived on a beautiful plantation in Virginia called Mount Vernon. Clue number 3. He served as a general in our Revolutionary War Army. Last clue. He was the very first president of our United States. Did you figure it out? Wrong side. George Washington. George, the founding father. This book is written by Frank Keating, and it's illustrated by Mike Wimmer. And Mike Wimmer, actually, to make the illustrations, he had painted these beautiful pictures of George Washington using oil paints. And you know, the reason that I chose this book in the Mount Vernon gift shop last week when we were there visiting was because of the illustrations. Because I think that the illustrations are one way to read a book. And you can really get a sense of who George Washington was and what he stood for and learn a little bit more about him just based on these pictures, on these paintings. Even if the words weren't even here, you could still get a glimpse of who George Washington was through the paintings, and I love that. Frank Keating decided to write this book because he wanted us to really know this amazing man, George Washington. In fact, in the back, he writes an author's note. Now, a biography is a nonfiction book, isn't it? Because it tells true things. We learn information. The author writes it for a reason, to teach us something new about a topic. In this case, George Washington. And he wrote a note on what else he wants us to learn from this story. He said, George Washington, our founding father, led us to independence in the Revolutionary War and was the first president of our nation. He was born in 1732, and though no photographs of him exist, one way we can understand him is through the rules of civility he copied as a young schoolboy with the help of his teachers in Virginia. So, the Rules of Civility was a book, and George Washington decided to copy those rules down into his own notebook so that he could save them. And really, it was just a book of rules, and it listed them, number 1 through, I don't know how many there are, but he wrote them all down. And really, the author puts a few of the rules of civility in this book. And they're beautiful, wise words for us to still live by. And you'll notice that they're written in a more formal way. And that's because the way that they talked and wrote in the early 1700s was just more formal. The words they used sounded a little different. They used bigger, beautiful vocabulary. And you'll notice that it sounds a little different, but I want to see if you can figure it out, what they're really saying. It's kind of like a little puzzle. The author goes on to say, as a young boy, George Washington couldn't have known he would become the first president of a new country, but the seeds of leadership and greatness were planted in his early years. It is my hope that by my sharing some of the incidents of young George Washington's life, made all the more real by Mike Wimmer's glowing paintings, you will have a better understanding of who George Washington was and how his life was shaped to influence our country and our lives so many years later. So what he's saying is that the rules of civility really helped shape him into becoming the man that he was, the great man. That the fact that he reflected on ways to become better, ways and rules that are in here, like don't interrupt people when they're talking, or if you take on something, make sure that you can really succeed at it and try your best at it. These rules really helped shape him into the man that he became, which is one of the greatest men in our country. By the way that Frank Keating wrote this book is in first person. That means it's almost as if George Washington is telling the story to you. He uses, I did this, and I did this in my life. So it's George Washington is telling us his story. Let's read it. Ooh, and here's a beautiful painting of Mount Vernon. And you can almost imagine when you go here, you can almost imagine George riding his horse all the way up to the front and coming inside and putting his hat on the banister and walking out to the front porch and looking out at the Potomac River. And there's a beautiful painting in the end of George Washington doing just that. Here we go. I am remembered as the father of my country, an indispensable man, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of my countrymen. Rule number 110. Labor to keep alive in your heart that little spark of celestial fire called conscience. First, I was a child. I was born February 22nd, 1732, the fifth of 10 children. My Virginia birthplace was a house built up on a bed of oyster shells. My parents were Augustine and Mary Ball Washington. To my great sadness, my father died when I was 11. In school, I studied hard. Arithmetic, penmanship, reading. I began to write a list of rules that my teachers taught me, rules of character that I knew I must always remember. At play, I was tall and strong. Frequently, I was asked to be the peacemaker. I formed a company of boy soldiers at school. I was chosen captain and spent hours of fun marching my friends across the grass. Rule 73. Think before you speak. Pronounce not imperfectly, nor bring out your words too hastily, but orderly and distinctly. When my classmates and I had no books to read, we entertained ourselves by memorizing the names and verses from old tombstones. John Heiser the miser is wiser, we hope. Rule 74. When another speaks, be attentive yourself and disturb not the audience. If any hesitate in his words, help him not, nor prompt him without desired. Interrupt him not, nor answer him till his speech be ended. At age 15, my formal education ended. Though defective to my mind, it was not unusual for children of my time to finish school at a young age. Since my father had passed away, I was expected to help my mother care for our large family. Rule 56. Associate yourself with men of good quality if you esteem your own reputation, for 'tis better to be alone than in bad company. When I left school, I became a surveyor. I was also a blacksmith and a carpenter. I could make a barrel about as well as a cooper could. My work became a classroom of life lessons. I learned from experience. I grew by reading and observing. Good manners bred good morals, and good morals produced a respected and successful adult. I applied the rules of civility to all that I did. I put them to practice. They were my primer on life. I first learned them in school. I wrote them down. They became a part of me. Rule 82. Undertake not what you cannot perform, but be careful to keep your promise. In my 20s, I was in the midst of the action. I was a major of militia. I was bent to arms and volunteered to lead a party through 900 miles of wilderness to deliver a message to the French. I was young, but I was trusted. Rule 35. Let your discourse with men of business be short and comprehensive. I was trained and confident. I was selected to lead. The weather was bone-chilling. I parleyed with Indians. A bullet fired not 15 steps away nearly struck me. I was thrown into a swift, roaring river and almost drowned, but my strength and will to survive saved me. For months I withstood cold and hardship, yet I accomplished my mission and came home a respected and wiser man. Rule number 1. Every action done in company ought to be with some sign of respect to those that are present. Later, I returned to the woods and accompanied our English forces on a mission to eject the French from their claims to the Ohio Valley. The battle was the opening of a worldwide 7-year war that would drive the French from North America and place our British cousins firmly in charge of the continent. I heard the bullets whistle, I wrote. 4 bullet holes were in my coat, and 2 horses were wounded under me. A lead ball passed through my hat. Our effort was unsuccessful, but I had done my boldest and best. I came home a hero. At age 27, I married Martha, a widow and mother of 2 children, Patsy and Jackie. I had no children of my own. My principles were clear. The lesson plan was straightforward. The rules of civility had been a part of me since I copied them when I was 15. They sustained me through the birth of our nation. When Virginia and the other colonies began the great debate for independence, I was there. I wore my uniform to the sessions of Congress. I was unanimously selected as commander-in-chief of our armies. I devoted myself solely to American Union and patriotism. Rule 44. When a man does all he can, though it succeeds not well, blame not him that did it. And boys and girls, the word unanimously, he was unanimously selected as commander-in-chief of the armies. That means there wasn't one person who voted against him. Every single member voted for George Washington to be their leader. I remembered the advice of my youth. I kept my promise. I was the first soldier commissioned by my country. I remained in the army and did not return home until each battle was won. Darkness and defeat, success and uncertainty, but never despair. The virtue of my men and the nobility of our cause would ultimately bring our reward. God was an active agent in all that we were attempting. Rule number 108. When you speak of God or his attributes, let it be seriously and with reverence. Our prayers were answered. This wonderful revolution was won, and those who would treat us as slaves were forced from our shores. But the ending was just the beginning. The new nation was weak. We had national character to establish. The country needed to defend liberty and provide for representative government. The preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government were staked on this experiment. A constitutional convention was called. I was unanimously chosen as its president. We began our task. Finally, our work was done. The Constitution, few in words, created a national government while limiting the powers of that government. It was a document devoted to the common good. When the states accepted the Constitution, I was unanimously elected as our country's first president, and then elected again for a second term. I led a great people to make a great land, to create a better world. And boys and girls, if you were unanimously selected 3 times to be our president, to lead our armies, to work in our militia, and be trusted, that says a lot about who you are as a person. And I hope that you really get a better sense of who George Washington was. And that's what the author really wanted you to learn from this story. He says he wanted you to have a better understanding of who George Washington was and how his life was shaped to influence our country and our lives so many years later. Because if we didn't have a leader like George Washington all those years ago, our country might not be what it is today. I hope that you enjoyed reading and learning about George Washington, and I hope this inspires you to go check out another book about this wonderful person. Have a great day, boys and girls, and I will see you soon.